I sat in that Miami-Dade County courtroom on a sweltering August morning, watching my father, Richard Walker Rick, to everyone who knew him, lean back smugly in his chair. My mother, Linda, sat beside him in a navy Chanel dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her lap. They had just finished declaring to Judge William Martinez that the 3 vacation properties in the Florida Keys, worth over $2 million combined, belonged entirely to them. Dad looked so proud when he announced it, his voice carrying that particular tone of self-righteousness I'd grown to recognize over 32 years. My daughter Emma deserves absolutely nothing from Margaret Thompson's estate. Mom's smile turned vicious as she added that I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman and earned 0 inheritance through my opportunistic caregiving. The judge held my unopened envelope in his hands, the one containing evidence that would shatter their lies completely. As his fingers broke the seal, my heart hammered against my ribs, knowing this single document would expose their fraud forever. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back 6 months to a rainy Tuesday morning in Key West, when my world first began to fracture. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from my own parents in a courthouse fighting for justice. It all started when my beloved grandmother, Margaret Maggie Thompson, passed away quietly in her homestead apartment overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. I'd been her primary caregiver for 3 exhausting but precious years while my parents lived their comfortable lives in Denver, visiting maybe twice annually and calling only on Christmas and birthdays and occasionally when they needed money. Maggie Thompson was 84 years old and sharp as a tack until her final week. She'd raised me more than my own parents ever did, especially after my messy divorce 2 years prior left me emotionally shattered and financially strained. When the doctors at Lower Keys Medical Center said she had only days left, I took emergency leave from my job as a pediatric nurse at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami to stay by her bedside around the clock. My supervisor, Dr. Patricia Reeves, didn't hesitate. "Family first, Emma," she'd said, squeezing my shoulder. "Take all the time you need." We spent those last precious hours talking about everything and nothing. Maggie told me stories I'd heard 100 times before, how she'd met my grandfather at a USO dance in 1962, how they'd scrimped and saved to buy their first property in Key West, how she'd learned to weather hurricanes, both literal and metaphorical. "Emma, baby girl," she'd whispered on what turned out to be her final coherent afternoon, her papery hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "You've been more of the daughter to me than Rick was ever a son. Don't you ever forget that." "Graham, don't talk like that," I'd protested, though we both knew the end was near. "Hush now. Listen to me." Her blue eyes still bright despite the morphine locked onto mine. "I've made sure you're taken care of. Everything I worked for, everything your grandfather and I built together, it's yours. I put it all in writing, made it legal and binding. But Emma," her grip tightened, "your father's going to fight you on this. Rick's always been weak, and that woman he married made him weaker." I'd chalked it up to end-of-life confusion, maybe some lingering resentment from old family dynamics. My father had always been a disappointment to Maggie, dropping out of college, bouncing between sales jobs, moving to Colorado to start fresh, more times than I could count. But I never imagined he'd actually steal from her. Maggie died at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, with me holding her hand and reading aloud from her favorite Mary Oliver poetry collection. The moment she took her last breath, something inside me broke and mended at the same time. I was alone, truly alone now. The funeral was small and dignified, held at St. Mary's Star of the Sea Catholic Church in Key West. I arranged everything myself, the flowers, white lilies, her favorite, the music Ave Maria and What a Wonderful World, the reception at her favorite Cuban restaurant on Duval Street. My parents claimed they were too grief-stricken to handle the details, which should have been my first warning sign. Rick Walker had never been too grief-stricken to do anything that benefited him. They arrived from Denver the night before the service, and I picked them up from Key West International Airport in Maggie's old Toyota Camry, the one I'd been driving her to doctor's appointments in for 3 years. "Emma?" My father's hug was brief and perfunctory. He smelled like bourbon and expensive cologne, a combination that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Hi, Dad. Mom." I turned to Linda, who offered her cheek for an air kiss. "You look exhausted, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Have you been taking care of yourself?" I'd been awake for 72 hours straight, holding vigil over my dying grandmother, but sure. Let's focus on my appearance. "I'm managing," I replied, loading their designer luggage into the trunk. The service is at 10 tomorrow. Father Rodriguez will be officiating. The drive to their hotel was awkward and stilted. Dad stared out the window at the passing Key West scenery, the rainbow flags, the quirky architecture, the tourists on rented mopeds with an expression of vague distaste. "I never understood why Mother stayed here," he muttered. "It's so tacky." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Maggie had loved Key West with a fierce passion. She'd volunteered at the Sea Turtle Rescue Played Bridge with her neighbors, walked the beach every morning to watch the sunrise. This island had been her sanctuary. But explaining that to Rick would be like explaining color to someone who'd chosen to see only in black and white. What I didn't notice, what I was too grief-fogged to notice, was the third person waiting in the hotel lobby when we arrived. A man in an expensive suit carrying a polished leather briefcase. "Rick Linda." He stood as we entered, extending his hand. "I got here an hour ago. Everything's prepared." "Perfect timing, David." My father shook his hand warmly, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, this is David Harrison, our attorney." Attorney. They'd brought an attorney to Maggie's funeral. "Mr. Harrison," I said carefully, shaking his hand. "I didn't realize we'd need legal representation for a funeral." "Oh, it's not for the funeral, dear," Linda interjected, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Just some estate matters we need to discuss. Nothing for you to worry about." Everything in me screamed warning, but I was too tired, too sad, too overwhelmed to process it properly. "I should go," I said, backing toward the door. "I still have to finalize things with the caterer. I'll see you tomorrow." I drove back to Maggie's apartment, my apartment now I supposed at least temporarily, and collapsed on her floral print sofa. The place still smelled like her lavender sachets and Estee Lauder powder and the faint scent of the Cuban coffee she'd drink every morning. I fell asleep there and dreamed of my grandmother teaching me to swim in the pool at the Marriott when I was 7 years old. "Kick your legs, mija. Don't be afraid. I've got you." The funeral itself was beautiful. Sarah Mitchell, Maggie's 80-year-old best friend from the Sunset Haven senior community, gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears. "Maggie Thompson was the kind of woman who remembered your birthday, brought you soup when you were sick, and never ever let you feel alone." Sarah said, her Cuban accent thick with emotion. She loved fiercely and completely. And her greatest love, the pride of her life, was her granddaughter Emma. I saw my father stiffen in the pew beside me. Linda's hand found his knee squeezing. After the service, I stood in the church courtyard, accepting condolences from Maggie's neighbors and friends, people who'd loved her, who'd shown up for her in ways her own son never had. "Your grandmother talked about you constantly," said Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 doors down from Maggie. "Every week she'd tell me a new story about Emma, the wonderful nurse Emma who saved a child's life, Emma who made her laugh. She was so proud," added another neighbor, Mr. Chen. "She showed everyone the photos you sent her. You were her whole world, honey." I noticed my parents huddled in whispered conversation with David Harrison near the parking lot. They kept glancing in my direction with expressions I couldn't interpret. Not grief. Something else. Something that made my stomach clench with unease. Sarah Mitchell noticed too. She appeared at my elbow, her dark eyes sharp despite her age. "Emma, mija, be careful," she murmured in Spanish, low enough that only I could hear. "Your grandmother, she told me things in her last months. Things about your father. Things you need to know." "What kind of things?" But before Sarah could answer, my father appeared all false bonhomie and wet eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, we need to talk. Could you come by Mother's apartment tomorrow? Say 9 a.m. There are some matters we need to discuss regarding the estate." Estate. That word again. "Of course, Dad," I heard myself say. "Tomorrow at 9. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah's warning about my father's expression about David Harrison's expensive briefcase. "Your father's going to fight you on this." Maggie's words echoed in my head. I pulled out my phone and started Googling Florida inheritance law at 2 a.m., my heart racing with a dread I didn't yet understand. They were already there when I arrived at Maggie's apartment the next morning, Dad, Linda, and David Harrison sitting around her dining room table like they owned the place, which, as it turned out, they claimed they did. "Emma, good morning." Dad gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit." I remained standing. "What's this about?" David Harrison opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency and extracted a folder full of legal documents. Miss Walker, I'll get straight to the point, he said in the tone of someone who charged $500 an hour. Your grandmother's will is quite clear. She left her entire estate, including the 3 properties here in the Keys, to your father, Richard Walker, as her direct heir and only child. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not possible. I assure you it's all properly documented. He slid a stapled document across the table. The will was executed 2 months before her death, properly witnessed and notarized. The properties in Key West, Marathon, and Islamorada all transfer to Mr. and Mrs. Walker. You inherit her personal effects and jewelry, which we've valued at approximately $15,000. I stared at the document, my vision tunneling. This can't be right. Gram always said she promised me those houses. She told me dozens of times they'd be mine. She wanted me to use them for families with special needs kids to continue her charity work with veterans. Linda laughed, actually laughed, a cold sound that raised goosebumps on my arms. Oh, Emma, your grandmother was getting senile in her final years. She said lots of things that didn't make sense. The legal documents are clear. She gestured to the papers with a perfectly manicured hand. As her son, your father inherited the real estate portfolio. You get some jewelry and personal items. That's more than generous, considering. Considering what? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Considering you only showed up when you needed something, Linda said sweetly. Nursing school tuition, Maggie paid. Divorce attorney fees, Maggie paid. Rent when you were between jobs, Maggie paid. You've already gotten quite a bit from her, wouldn't you say? The accusation was so breathtakingly unfair, so deliberately cruel, that for a moment I couldn't speak. I'd sacrificed 3 years of my life caring for Maggie. I'd given up dating, given up my social life, worked extra shifts to afford gas money for the 2-hour drive from Miami to Key West every weekend. I'd held her hand through scary diagnoses, managed her medications, advocated for her with doctors who wanted to dismiss her as just elderly. I'd loved her, genuinely, completely loved her, and they thought I was an opportunist. I want to see the will, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. The original, not a copy. David Harrison's expression turned condescending in the way only expensive lawyers can manage. Miss Walker, I understand this is difficult, but estate documents are private family matters. Your parents have graciously chosen to share the details with you, but they're under no legal obligation to provide originals of confidential paperwork. She's family too, I protested, looking directly at my father. Dad, please. I have a right to know what Graham actually wrote. Just let me see it. Something flickered across Rick's face, guilt maybe or shame, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that hard mask of righteousness. You have the right to what we choose to give you, Emma. His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. If you keep pushing this issue, you might find yourself with nothing at all. Mother left those properties to us because we're her direct heirs and because we have the financial stability to maintain them properly. A single nurse living in a rented studio apartment is hardly equipped to handle 3 luxury vacation homes worth over $2 million. The number made my head spin. $2 million. I'd known the properties were valuable, but I'd never actually calculated their worth. This isn't about the money, I said, though my voice shook. This is about honoring what Graham wanted. She talked to me about those properties constantly. She showed me renovation plans. She discussed how we'd set up the rental program for special needs families. She made me promise Dad. She made me promise I'd use them to help people. Promises from a confused old woman, Linda said dismissively. Emma, be realistic. Your father and I can actually afford to maintain these properties, pay the property taxes, handle the upkeep. What were you planning to do? Quit your job. You can barely afford your own rent. The conversation escalated from there. Linda accused me of manipulating Maggie during her vulnerable final years. Rick threatened to contest any legal action I might consider, his face flushing red with anger or guilt or both. David Harrison remained silent but took notes throughout our argument, which made me deeply viscerally uncomfortable. Everything I said was being documented, filed away, prepared to be used against me. Finally, as they prepared to leave with boxes of Maggie's most valuable possessions, her antique jewelry box, her collection of first-edition books, the Tiffany lamp that had belonged to her mother, I made one final plea. Please, Dad, just let me see a copy of the will. That's all I'm asking. I need to know that this is really what she wanted. I need to know she changed her mind about me. My father turned back at the door, and for just a second I saw something raw in his expression. pain maybe, regret. But then it hardened into stone. If you pursue this matter legally, Emma, you will lose more than just an inheritance. You will lose your family completely. Is that really what you want? To be totally alone in the world? The threat was clear and painful, but as I stood there in Maggie's empty apartment that afternoon, surrounded by the few personal items they'd deemed worthless enough to leave me, I realized something important. I was already alone. My mother had died when I was 6. My father had remarried within a year and moved to Colorado, essentially abandoning me to be raised by Maggie. Linda had never wanted a stepdaughter, had made that clear from day one. And now Rick, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd half-heartedly shown up to my nursing school graduation, was threatening me over money. I'd been alone for a long time. I'd just been too afraid to admit it. That night, unable to sleep in my own apartment back in Miami, I drove back down to Key West at 2 a.m. I had a key to Maggie's place. Technically, I probably shouldn't have been there, but I needed to be close to her. Needed to think. I made coffee the way she'd taught me, strong Cuban style with just a touch of sugar, and sat at her kitchen table examining the documents my parents had shown me. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. The will was dated February 15th, just 2 months before Maggie died. But I remembered clearly in January, Maggie had been excited about finally getting her affairs in order properly. She'd made a big deal about it, asking me to take her to her attorney's office, celebrating afterward with lunch at her favorite seafood place. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my photos. There, January 18th. A selfie of Maggie and me at Latitude's restaurant, her smiling broadly, holding up a glass of champagne. The caption I'd written, "Graham celebrating getting her will updated," says she can finally rest easy knowing everything's taken care of. Love this woman. If she'd updated her will in January, why would she have done it again in February? I studied the signature on the document more carefully. It looked like Maggie's signature, the distinctive M, with its flourish, the way she looped her G's. But something was slightly off. The pressure seemed different. The slant wasn't quite right. The witness signatures were listed as James Mitchell and Sarah Williams. I knew Maggie's entire social circle. There was no James Mitchell. And Sarah Williams, there was a Sarah Williams who'd lived at Sunset Haven, but she'd moved to Ohio to live with her daughter over a year ago. I'd helped Maggie plan a going-away party for her. My hands started trembling as the implications hit me. My father had forged my grandmother's will. Or rather, he'd presented an old version, one from before Maggie had updated it in January, and passed it off as her final wishes. I pulled out my laptop and started Googling frantically. How to challenge a will in Florida. Statute of limitations, estate fraud. What to do if you suspect forged will. At 4 a.m., I found a law firm website that specialized in estate disputes, Chen & Associates, based in Miami. The senior partner, Catherine Chen, had a particular expertise in elder abuse cases. I sent an email to their intake address, knowing it was the middle of the night, but unable to wait. My name is Emma Walker. I believe my father forged my grandmother's will to steal a multi-million-dollar inheritance. I need help. Please. Then I did something I should have done days ago. I called Sarah Mitchell. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. Emma Mija, what's wrong? It's 4 a.m. Sarah, I'm sorry to wake you, but I need to ask you something important. Do you remember Graham updating her will in January? There was a long pause. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was fully alert and deadly serious. Emma, you need to come see me. Right now. There are things you need to know. Things your grandmother made me promise to tell you if something like this happened. Something like what? Just come. I'll make coffee. Sarah Mitchell lived in a cozy 2-bedroom condo at Sunset Haven, a senior living community in Old Town Key West. She answered the door still in her bathrobe, her silver hair in curlers, but her eyes were sharp and worried. Come in, mija. Sit. Her living room smelled like Café Cubano and cinnamon rolls. Photos of her children and grandchildren covered every surface. She gestured me to her floral sofa. Seemingly every woman of her generation had the same taste in furniture, and poured 2 cups of strong coffee. Emma, your grandmother came to me 6 months before she died. Sarah began without preamble. She was worried about Robert. Said he'd been calling more often, always asking about her properties, about her finances. She said Linda had been pressuring her to take out a reverse mortgage on the homestead property. A reverse mortgage? Why? Money, of course. Your father told her they were in financial trouble, that they needed help. Maggie was too smart for that. She knew a reverse mortgage would eat up all the equity, but it made her realize something important. Sarah leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Robert wasn't calling because he cared about her health or her happiness. He was calling because he was waiting for her to die so he could inherit. The words hit me like a slap, even though part of me had known it was true. So in January, Maggie updated her will, Sarah continued. She asked me and Dr. James Peterson to witness it. We came here to this apartment on a Saturday afternoon. Your grandmother was completely lucid, completely certain about what she was doing. She left everything to you, Emma. The properties, the investment accounts, the life insurance, all of it. And she specifically disinherited Robert. I remember the exact wording. I am deliberately excluding my son Richard Walker from my estate due to years of financial exploitation and emotional neglect. Tears started rolling down my face. Where is this will, Sarah? Do you have a copy? Maggie didn't want copies floating around. She was afraid Robert would find out and try to, destroy it or something. She said she was hiding the original somewhere safe. Somewhere only family would think to look, but where Robert wouldn't find it even if he searched. Did she say where? Sarah shook her head. But Emma, there's something else. Something important. A few weeks before your grandmother died, Robert visited. It was the first time he'd come to see her in over a year. Maggie was so happy at first, she thought maybe he'd finally decided to be a real son to her. What happened? He spent the whole visit asking about her documents, where she kept her will, where her financial papers were, whether she'd updated anything recently. Maggie got suspicious. After he left, she told me she was going to hide her important papers somewhere he'd never think to look. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. My mind was racing, trying to think like Maggie. Somewhere only family would think to look. And then it hit me. Maggie had been religious her entire life. Catholic, devout, the kind who went to Mass every Sunday and said the rosary every night. She'd kept her most treasured possession on her nightstand for as long as I could remember. Her mother's Bible. The massive leather-bound King James Bible that had been in her family for 3 generations. I stood up so abruptly I almost spilled my coffee. Sarah, thank you. I have to go. I think I know where it is. Emma, wait, but I was already at the door. I drove back to Maggie's apartment, doing 15 over the speed limit, my heart pounding. Please let me be right. Please let it still be there. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it a few hours earlier. I went straight to Maggie's bedroom, to the nightstand where that enormous Bible sat like it had for decades. The leather was worn soft with age, the pages thin as tissue paper. I opened it carefully, starting at the beginning. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, nothing. I kept going, my hands trembling. And then tucked between the pages of Psalms, Maggie's favorite book, the one she'd read when she was scared or sad or needed comfort, I found them. Several folded legal documents. On top was a handwritten letter in Maggie's familiar script. My darling Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and something has gone wrong with my plans. I'm sorry, baby girl. I tried to protect you from this. I'm writing this letter because I'm afraid I'm certain that Robert is going to try to steal your inheritance. Over the past 2 years, I've watched my son become someone I don't recognize. He only calls when he needs money. He lies about where he is and what he's doing. He's taken money from my accounts without permission, over $47,000 that I've documented. I confronted him about it once, and he cried and apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Again and again. Your stepmother Linda is the one pushing him, I think. She wants the properties. She's always been jealous that I helped you through nursing school, that I gave you money after your divorce. So I've updated my will. Everything I own, the 3 properties, my investment accounts, my life insurance, all of it goes to you. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you've earned it through love and care and showing up when I needed you most. I've hidden this will in my mother's Bible because I know you'll find it. You're the only one who knows how much this Bible means to me. Robert never paid attention to things like that. Emma, listen to me. Do not let Robert and Linda steal what's rightfully yours. They will try to intimidate you, threaten you, make you feel guilty. Don't fall for it. Contact Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Peterson. They witnessed this will and can testify that I was of sound mind when I signed it. I've also included bank statements showing where Robert stole money from my accounts, proof of his years of financial exploitation. Fight for this, Emma. Not because of the money, but because it's right. Because these were my wishes and I trusted you to honor them. You've been more of a daughter to me than Robert was ever a son. Don't let him take that away from you. I love you, my brave girl. Make me proud. Your Graham Margaret. Below the letter was the will itself, dated January 18th, the same day as our celebratory lunch. It was witnessed by Sarah Mitchell and Dr. James Peterson with their addresses and signatures clearly marked. I read through the provisions with tears streaming down my face. I, Margaret Ann Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to the property at 1247 Simonton Street, Key West, the property at 892 Overseas Highway Marathon, the property at 334 Windley Key Drive, Islamorada, all investment accounts with Vanguard, all checking and savings accounts with First National Bank of the Keys, and my life insurance policy with MetLife, to my granddaughter Emma Catherine Walker. I am deliberately excluding my son Richard Walker from my estate due to years of financial exploitation, emotional neglect, and prioritizing his own comfort over his mother's well-being. This exclusion is intentional and made with full understanding of its implications. It was all there. Everything. The truth. My father hadn't just lied to me. He'd committed fraud. He'd forged a will or used an old superseded version to steal $2 million from his own mother's estate. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not hot and explosive, but cold and calculating and absolutely certain. I carefully photographed every page of the will and Maggie's letter with my phone. Then I photographed the bank statements she'd included pages of highlighted withdrawals transfers to Rick's account pattern of theft over 2 years. I placed the originals in a manila envelope and put them in my bag. Then I called Catherine Chen's office and left a message with her answering service. This is Emma Walker. I emailed at 4 a.m. about a forged will case. I have the original will witness testimony available and documentation of financial elder abuse. I need an emergency consultation as soon as possible. This is urgent. As the sun rose over the Atlantic, painting Maggie's bedroom in shades of gold and pink, I sat on her bed and let myself cry, not from sadness but from determination. Make me proud, Maggie had written. Oh, Graham, I'm about to make you so proud. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time since Maggie's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt ready. Catherine Chen's office occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Miami's financial district. The view overlooked Biscayne Bay, but I barely noticed it as I sat across from her on Monday morning, spreading Maggie's documents across her mahogany desk. Catherine was nothing like I'd imagined. Maybe 45, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind designer frames, and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She'd built her reputation defending victims of elder abuse, and her track record was formidable. Walk me through everything, she said, pouring us both coffee from a French press. Start from the beginning. I told her about the 3 years caring for Maggie, about my father's rare visits and constant requests for money, about the funeral and the fake will. Catherine listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I showed her Maggie's real will and the accompanying letter, her expression hardened. This is textbook elder abuse and estate fraud, she said, reading through the documents. But Emma, I need you to understand something before we proceed. This isn't just about winning a legal case. You're about to accuse your own father of multiple felonies. If we pursue this, and I think we should, it will destroy your family permanently. There's no going back from this. My family was destroyed the moment my father decided to steal from his dying mother, I said quietly. I'm just making it official. Catherine studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, then let's build an airtight case. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine's team conducted an investigation that revealed a pattern of abuse even worse than I'd imagined. Her forensic accountant, Michael Rodriguez, traced every suspicious transaction in Maggie's accounts. Your father didn't just steal $47,000, Michael reported at our second meeting, pulling up spreadsheets on his laptop. Over the past 2 years, Richard and Linda Walker systematically withdrew funds for personal use. Casino trips to Vegas, designer shopping sprees, a BMW they purchased last year paid in full with a wire transfer from your grandmother's savings account. The evidence kept mounting. Phone records showed Maggie had called my father 6 times on her final day alive, all unanswered. His location data from his cell phone provider put him at the Bellagio in Las Vegas gambling while his mother was dying alone in a hospital room. There's more, Catherine said grimly, sliding another document across her desk. 3 days before your grandmother died while she was heavily sedated on morphine, your father had her sign papers changing the beneficiary on her MetLife insurance policy from you to him. The policy is worth $125,000. I felt physically sick. The hospital would have records of her condition that day, right? Proof she wasn't competent to sign legal documents. Already subpoenaed them. The nurse's notes indicate she was confused and disoriented, drifting in and out of consciousness. There's no way any legitimate notary would have approved that signature. But someone did. Let me guess, I said bitterly. Someone my father paid. Catherine's silence was answer enough. The hardest part was accepting that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. My father had been planning this for years. Catherine's investigator found Google searches on Rick's laptop. How long does probate take in Florida? Can a will be contested? Statute of limitations for inheritance fraud. The earliest search was dated 18 months before Maggie's death. My father had been waiting for his mother to die. Before filing the lawsuit, I made one last attempt at resolution. Maybe it was naive. Maybe I was still that little girl who remembered her daddy teaching her to swim, pushing her on playground swings, reading her bedtime stories before he remarried and moved away. Or maybe I just needed to look him in the eye one more time and give him a chance to do the right thing. I flew to Denver on a Thursday in late April, renting a car at the airport and driving to my parents' house in Cherry Creek, an upscale neighborhood where homes started at $1 million and people pretended not to notice your financial desperation as long as you kept up appearances. Their house was exactly as I remembered from my one previous visit 2 years ago, immaculate landscaping 3-car garage, that blue BMW in the driveway that Maggie had unknowingly purchased for them. I rang the doorbell at 10 a.m., my heart hammering. My father answered in golf clothes, pressed khakis, and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. His expression shifted from surprise to anger in less than a second. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I came to give you one last chance to do the right thing," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I found Graham's real will dad, the one from January that leaves everything to me. I have bank records showing you stole almost $50,000 from her. I have witness statements, medical records, everything." For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear guilt. But then his jaw hardened. "You need to leave. Now. Dad, please. Just return the properties and the money you took. We can avoid a court battle, avoid criminal charges. You and Linda can walk away and we can all just move on with our lives." "Those documents are forgeries," he said flatly. "You made them up because you can't accept that Mother chose to leave her estate to her son instead of her opportunistic granddaughter." The accusation stung, but I'd expected it. I pulled copies of the will and bank statements from my bag. "These are real, and you know it. I have the originals locked in a safety deposit box. I have Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Peterson ready to testify. I have—" "Who the hell is that?" Linda's voice came from behind Rick. She appeared in the doorway wearing yoga pants and a tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Rick, why is she here?" "She's leaving," my father said. "No, I'm not. Not until you admit what you did." I looked between them, these two people who were supposed to be my family. "You stole from a dying woman. Your own mother. My grandmother, who loved you despite everything, who kept hoping you'd finally be the son she needed, who cried after every phone call because you only ever wanted her money." Linda's face flushed red. "How dare you come to our home and— She deserved better than you." The words burst out of me raw and furious. She deserved a son who actually cared whether she lived or died. She deserved a family who would sit with her in her final hours instead of gambling in Vegas with her stolen money. Rick stepped toward me, and for the first time in my life, I saw a real menace in his eyes. "You self-righteous little bitch. You think because you played nurse for a few years that you deserve a multi-million-dollar inheritance. You think your precious Maggie was some kind of saint. She was better than you'll ever be." And then my father said something that changed everything. "You want the truth, Emma, fine. Here's the truth. We planned this for 2 years. We made sure we were positioned to inherit everything because we deserved compensation for years of being second best to you." Linda grabbed his arm. "Rick, shut up." But he shook her off, stepping closer to me, his breath smelling of bourbon even though it was barely 10 a.m. "Do you have any idea what it was like growing up with Margaret Thompson as a mother? Nothing I did was ever good enough. I wasn't smart enough, successful enough, ambitious enough. She compared me to everyone else's kids, made me feel like a failure my entire childhood. And then you came along and suddenly she had the perfect daughter she'd always wanted. Emma, the brilliant student. Emma, the caring nurse. Emma, who could do no wrong. I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time. This wasn't about money. This was about 30 years of resentment that had festered into something ugly and criminal. So you decided to steal from her as revenge? I asked incredulously. We decided to take control of our inheritance before she could give it all away to someone who didn't deserve it. Linda interjected, her voice sharp. Do you know what your precious Maggie did for you? Paid for your nursing school $60,000. Gave you $15,000 for your divorce attorney. Bought you a car. All while lecturing us about fiscal responsibility and making us feel like beggars every time we needed help. She helped me because I was there for her. My voice cracked. I didn't ask for any of that. She offered because she loved me. Because unlike you, I actually spent time with her. I cared about her as a person, not a bank account. Rick moved even closer, close enough that I could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. You manipulated a vulnerable old woman into changing her will. I didn't even know she'd changed it until after she died. And now you're trying to destroy your own family because of greed. No, I said quietly, backing toward my rental car. I'm trying to honor a good woman's final wishes. You destroyed this family when you chose to commit fraud, when you chose to steal from your dying mother, when you decided that your hurt feelings justified criminal behavior. Rick followed me down the driveway. If you file that lawsuit, Emma, I will make your life hell. I will drag your name through the mud. I will tell everyone you're a lying, manipulative... He reached for my arm and I jerked away. Don't touch me. You're going to regret this, Linda screamed from the doorway. After everything this family has done for you, we raised you when your mother died. No, I said, opening my car door. Maggie raised me. You tolerated me at best. And now I'm going to make sure she gets the justice she deserves. As I drove away, I saw my father in the rearview mirror, standing in his driveway, in his expensive golf clothes, looking smaller somehow, diminished. I cried the entire drive back to the airport, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. My father wasn't the man I'd wanted him to be. Maybe he never had been. Catherine filed the lawsuit the following Monday. The complaint was comprehensive fraud, forgery, theft, elder abuse, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conversion of property. We requested the return of all properties, full restitution for stolen funds, punitive damages of $350,000, and a referral to the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The lawsuit made the local news. Miami nurse sues parents over $2 million inheritance fraud. My phone exploded with calls, concerned colleagues, curious acquaintances, reporters wanting comments. I ignored all of them except one, Sarah Mitchell, calling to offer her support. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, mija, she said, her voice warm despite the situation. You're fighting for what's right. That takes courage. It doesn't feel courageous, I admitted. It feels awful. The right thing often does. My father hired David Harrison's firm to defend him in civil court, but the criminal exposure was more serious. 2 weeks after we filed, the state attorney's office announced they were opening a formal investigation into elder abuse charges. Catherine's team continued building our case. She deposed Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Peterson, both of whom gave powerful testimony about Maggie's mental competency and her clear intentions to leave everything to me. We subpoenaed my parents' financial records, and the results were devastating. Not only had they stolen from Maggie, but they were drowning in debt, credit cards, maxed out mortgage behind an equity line of credit they couldn't repay. The inheritance wasn't just wanted. It was desperately needed to avoid financial collapse. 3 weeks before the trial, my father and Linda showed up at my apartment. I saw them through the peephole and almost didn't answer. But something, maybe masochism, maybe morbid curiosity, made me open the door with the chain still attached. What do you want? Linda spoke first, and she looked terrible. Pale, thin, dark circles under her eyes. Emma, please, can we talk just for 5 minutes? Against my better judgment, I let them in. They sat on my cheap IKEA sofa, looking out of place and uncomfortable. Rick stared at his hands. Linda twisted her wedding ring around and around her finger. We want to settle, Linda said finally. We'll give you one of the properties, the smallest one, and we'll pay back $20,000 of what we took. That's fair, isn't it? You get something, we get something, and we can all move on. I stared at her in disbelief. You think that's fair? You stole everything and you want to keep 2/3 of it as a reward. We're desperate, Emma. Rick finally looked up, and I was startled to see tears in his eyes. We're going to lose our house. We're buried in debt. The legal fees alone are killing us. If this goes to trial, if we're convicted of criminal charges, I could go to prison. We could lose everything. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. This broken, frightened man was still my father. But then I thought of Maggie calling out to him in her final hours, unanswered. You should have thought of that before you forged a will and stole from your dying mother. Please, Linda whispered. We made mistakes. We're sorry. But is this really worth destroying your family over? You destroyed this family, I said quietly. I'm just refusing to pretend you didn't. They left without another word. The trial began on a Monday morning in August. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everything feel slightly surreal. Judge William Martinez was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Catherine had warned me he was fair, but had zero tolerance for dishonesty. David Harrison delivered his opening statement with practiced polish painting Maggie as a confused elderly woman and me as a manipulative caregiver who'd isolated her from her loving family. Emma Walker took advantage of geographical distance to insert herself as the primary caregiver, he argued. She systematically turned Mrs. Thompson against her own son. The will the plaintiff presents is either a forgery or represents the confused ramblings of a woman who was no longer competent to make legal decisions. Catherine's opening was methodical and devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a calculated fraud perpetrated by a son against his own dying mother. The evidence will show that Richard and Linda Walker stole nearly $50,000 from Margaret Thompson's accounts, manipulated her into granting them power of attorney, and then forged documents to steal an inheritance that rightfully belonged to the plaintiff. The first witnesses were character witnesses. Sarah Mitchell took the stand in her Sunday best, speaking with the clarity of someone who'd lived through real hardship and knew the difference between right and wrong. Margaret was as sharp as anyone I've ever known, she testified. She read the newspaper every day, did the crossword puzzle in pen, balanced her own checkbook. When she signed that will in January, she knew exactly what she was doing and why. David Harrison tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she was biased by friendship. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you had a close personal relationship with Mrs. Thompson that might color your perception? Yes, I loved her, Sarah said firmly. And that's exactly why I know she was in her right mind. She talked about her will constantly. She was proud of finally protecting Emma from Robert's greed. Dr. Peterson testified next, presenting medical records that documented Maggie's cognitive health. In my professional opinion, Margaret Thompson was fully capable of making legal decisions right up until her final week of life, he stated clearly. She had no signs of dementia, no confusion, no cognitive impairment whatsoever. The afternoon session focused on the financial evidence. Catherine presented bank records showing the pattern of theft matched to luxury purchases my parents had made. These weren't gifts, Catherine explained to the jury. These were unauthorized withdrawals made possible by power of attorney, obtained through false pretenses, and then abused for personal enrichment. The most damaging testimony came on day 2. Catherine called the hospital administrator who'd been on duty during Maggie's final days. Can you describe Mrs. Thompson's condition on March 18th, 3 days before her death? She was heavily sedated on morphine for pain management, the administrator testified. The nurse's notes indicate she was drifting in and out of consciousness, often confused about where she was or who was visiting. And yet Mr. Walker had her sign legal documents that day. According to the visitor log, yes, he was alone with her for approximately 30 minutes. Catherine introduced the life insurance policy change signed with Maggie's shaky, barely legible signature. This represents elder abuse at its most despicable level, she stated. Taking advantage of a dying woman's vulnerability to steal money intended for her granddaughter's future. On day 3, Rick took the stand. Catherine's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Walker, how many times did you visit your mother in her final year of life? Rick hesitated. Several times. I don't have exact dates. Catherine pulled out airline records. According to these records, you flew to Florida exactly twice. Both visits were under 48 hours. Is that your definition of being a loving, attentive son? I had work obligations. Where were you when your mother called you 6 times on March 21st, the day she died? Silence. Mr. Walker, I'll answer for you. Cell phone records place you at the Bellagio Casino in Las Vegas. Gambling, with money stolen from your dying mother's bank account. The courtroom was dead silent. You're twisting... Am I? Catherine's voice was sharp. Let's talk about the $47,000 you withdrew from her accounts. Can you explain what that money was used for? Emergencies, family expenses. Such as Catherine pulled out receipts. $4,000 at the Bellagio, $3,200 at Louis Vuitton, $8,000 for a BMW down payment. What emergency required designer handbags and luxury cars? Mr. Walker. Rick's face flushed red. My mother was generous with her money. Was she generous, or did you steal it? She offered. Did she offer, or did you manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman who was desperate for her son's love and attention, and then Rick broke? You want the truth, he shouted, standing up in the witness box. Yes, I took the money, I forged the goddamn will, and you know what, I don't regret it. Do you have any idea what it was like living in Emma's shadow my entire adult life, being compared to perfect little Emma who could do no wrong? David Harrison was on his feet. Your Honor, my client, but Rick wasn't done. My mother made me feel like a failure for 40 years. Nothing I did was ever good enough. And then Emma shows up playing nurse, and suddenly she's the golden child who deserves everything. Well, I deserved something too. I deserved compensation for years of being told I wasn't good enough. The courtroom erupted. Judge Martinez banged his gavel. Mr. Walker, sit down. But Rick was beyond listening, beyond controlling himself. All the resentment, all the shame, all the justification he'd built up came pouring out. She was dying anyway. The money wasn't going to do her any good. At least I could use it to save my life, my marriage, my house. At least He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what he'd just confessed to. In that moment of crystalline silence, I watched my father collapse back into his chair, his face in his hands. Linda was crying. David Harrison looked like he'd just watched his case spontaneously combust. And I felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication. Just a vast, empty sadness that it had come to this. Judge Martinez's voice cut through the chaos. We'll take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Harrison, I suggest you have a serious conversation with your client about the implications of what just happened. As the courtroom cleared, I caught my father's eye one last time. He looked broken, defeated, small, and I turned away. After the 30-minute recess, the courtroom reconvened in tense silence. Rick sat at the defense table looking hollowed out, his earlier outburst having drained something fundamental from him. Linda wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. David Harrison looked like a man watching his career implode in real time. Judge Martinez addressed the court with barely controlled anger. Before we continue, I want to make something absolutely clear. This court takes elder abuse extremely seriously. What I witnessed before the recess was a confession to multiple felonies. Mr. Harrison, does your client wish to reconsider his testimony? David Harrison stood, his usual polish gone. Your Honor, my client requests a brief continuance to discuss. Denied. We're continuing with the plaintiff's case. Ms. Chen. Catherine stood, and I could see the controlled satisfaction in her expression. She'd been building toward this moment, but Rick's breakdown had accelerated everything. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Rebecca Walsh, forensic document examiner. Dr. Walsh was a formidable woman in her 50s who'd spent 30 years analyzing questioned documents for law enforcement and civil cases. She wheeled a cart with enlarged photographs of signatures into the courtroom. Dr. Walsh, what did you conclude from your analysis of the will presented by the defendants? The signature attributed to Margaret Thompson is a forgery, she stated without hesitation. When you examine the authentic signatures, she pointed to one enlarged photo, you can see consistent pen pressure, specific stroke patterns, and a distinctive tremor pattern common in elderly individuals. The disputed signature, another photo, shows different pen pressure, hesitation marks inconsistent with Mrs. Thompson's usual signing style, and most tellingly lacks the age-related tremor entirely. She walked the jury through comparison after comparison, each one damning. In my professional opinion, the disputed will was signed by someone attempting to mimic Mrs. Thompson's signature, but they failed to replicate the subtle characteristics that make handwriting unique. David Harrison tried to challenge her credentials, her methodology, her conclusions. She batted away each question with calm expertise. But Catherine wasn't done. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce additional evidence regarding the witnesses listed on the disputed will. She pulled out a document. James Mitchell, listed as witness number 1, does not exist. We contacted Sunset Haven Senior Community where Mrs. Thompson lived. No resident by that name has ever lived there. We've checked property records, voter registration, Florida driver's licenses. There is no James Mitchell in Key West matching the age and description that would make him a viable witness. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sarah Williams, witness number 2, is a real person. However, Catherine pulled out a phone log. Here's a recorded interview we conducted with her 2 weeks ago. Missy Williams moved to Ohio in January of 2023, 18 months before Mrs. Thompson's death. She states categorically that she never witnessed any will signing and that the signature on this document is not hers. Catherine projected the audio recording. Sarah Williams' elderly voice filled the courtroom. I moved to Toledo to live with my daughter in January 2023. I haven't been back to Florida since. That's not my signature on those papers. I would never have signed something I didn't witness. If someone used my name, they did it without my permission or knowledge. Your Honor, Catherine continued, we also have something else. Digital forensics recovered from Mr. Walker's personal laptop. She pulled out a printed document that made Rick physically flinch. These are draft versions of the disputed will found in a folder titled Mom Estate on Richard Walker's computer. The metadata shows they were created 14 months before Mrs. Thompson's death. There are multiple versions showing revisions and refinements over time. Catherine read from the screen. Also found in Mr. Walker's browser history, Google searches for how to forge a will, elder abuse laws Florida, statute of limitations inheritance fraud, and how long does probate take. She turned to face my father directly. This wasn't a spontaneous crime, Your Honor. This was premeditated fraud planned over the course of years, executed against a vulnerable elderly woman who trusted her son. The jury looked horrified. Several were staring at Rick with open disgust. I have one more witness, Catherine said. I call Linda Walker. Linda took the stand looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Her hands shook as she was sworn in. Catherine's approach was different, with Linda less aggressive, more psychological. Mrs. Walker, when did you first become aware that your husband was planning to contest his mother's will? I don't recall exactly. Let me refresh your memory. We have text messages between you and Mr. Walker from March of 2023, over a year before Mrs. Thompson's death. Would you like me to read them? Linda's face crumpled. No. In these texts, you and Mr. Walker discuss the plan, making sure E doesn't get everything, and we deserve this more than she does. The E refers to Emma, correct? Yes, Linda whispered. Mrs. Walker, why did you believe you deserved your mother-in-law's estate more than her granddaughter? And then Linda did something unexpected. She started crying, not the manipulative tears I'd seen before, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Because we needed it, she gasped out. Because we were drowning. We had $80,000 in credit card debt. We were 3 months behind on our mortgage. Rick lost his job last year and didn't tell anyone. We were going to lose everything. So you decided to steal from an elderly woman. We didn't think of it as stealing. Linda's voice rose. Margaret had more money than she could ever use. 3 properties just sitting there while we were losing our house. And Emma already got so much from her. Nursing school paid for money for her divorce, a car. We never got anything. You never got anything because you never showed up, Catherine said quietly. When's the last time you visited Mrs. Thompson? Linda's face flushed. It had been a while. 2 years. It had been 2 years. And in that time you called her twice. Both times to ask for money. That's not, Mrs. Walker, where were you on March 21st, the day Margaret Thompson died? Silence. I'll tell you where you were. According to hotel records, you were at the Bellagio in Las Vegas with your husband gambling with money stolen from his dying mother's account. While Emma held Margaret's hand through her final hours, you were playing blackjack. Linda broke completely then. I know it was wrong, but you don't understand what it's like to watch someone get everything while you get nothing. Emma was always the perfect one, the one Margaret loved. Do you know what it's like to be compared to that constantly, to be made to feel like you're not good enough, not worthy? So this was about jealousy, Catherine said. You stole from a vulnerable elderly woman because you were jealous of her relationship with her granddaughter. Yes, Linda screamed. Yes, I was jealous. I was angry. I was desperate. And when Rick said we could fix the will, make it right, give us what we deserved, I didn't stop him. I helped him. We did it together. The courtroom was silent except for Linda's sobbing. Catherine let the moment hang, then said quietly, "No further questions." After lunch recess, Catherine called me to the stand. I'd been dreading this moment, having to speak publicly about my relationship with Maggie, having to justify why I deserved her love and her legacy. Catherine's questions were gentle, designed to let me tell my story. "Emma, can you describe your relationship with your grandmother?" I took a breath. "Maggie raised me after my mother died when I was 6. My father remarried quickly and moved to Denver, and I stayed with Maggie. She got me through middle school, high school, helped me apply to nursing school. When I went through my divorce 2 years ago and felt like my life was falling apart, she let me stay with her for 3 months until I could get back on my feet." What was it like caring for her in her final years? The memories flooded back. It was hard, really hard. She was so independent her whole life, and watching her need help with basic things, bathing, getting dressed, remembering her medications, it broke my heart. But it was also precious. We had time together, real time. We'd sit on her porch watching the sunset, and she'd tell me stories about my grandfather, about my mother. She made me promise I'd use her properties to help families with disabled kids because she'd volunteered with wounded veterans for 20 years and knew how hard it was for families with special needs. Did she ever discuss her will with you? All the time. She was very clear about her wishes. She wanted me to have the properties because she trusted me to use them the way she would have. Not for profit, but for good. Did you know the specific contents of her January will? No. I knew she'd updated it. She was excited about it, said she'd finally taken care of everything properly. But I didn't know the details until after she died, and I found it in her Bible. Catherine paused. Emma read for the court what your grandmother wrote to you in her final letter. With shaking hands, I read Maggie's words aloud. By the time I reached, "You've been more of a daughter to me than Robert was ever a son," I was crying. Several jury members were wiping their eyes. David Harrison stood for cross-examination, and I could see he was in an impossible position. "Miss Walker, didn't you benefit substantially from your grandmother's generosity during your lifetime?" "Yes," I said honestly. "She helped me through nursing school and gave me money after my divorce. I'm grateful for that." "So you felt entitled to more?" "No." I looked directly at him. I felt she deserved to have her wishes honored. This was never about what I'm entitled to. It's about what she wanted. What she explicitly stated in a legal document witnessed by 2 people, written when she was completely sound of mind. "You expect this court to believe you didn't manipulate an elderly woman?" "I spent 3 years showing up," I interrupted. "I drove 2 hours each way every weekend. I held her hand through chemotherapy. I slept in a hospital chair for 5 days when she had pneumonia. I loved her. Actually loved her not because of what she could give me, but because of who she was." I looked over at my father. "Can you say the same?" Harrison tried another angle. "Do you feel any sympathy for your parents' financial struggles?" "I feel sympathy for the people they could have been," I said carefully. "My father could have been a man who showed up for his dying mother. Linda could have been someone who didn't view a grieving elderly woman as a financial opportunity. But sympathy doesn't excuse elder abuse. It doesn't excuse forgery. It doesn't excuse stealing from someone who trusted you. You're willing to send your own father to prison." I met Rick's eyes for the first time since his breakdown. My father was willing to steal from his own dying mother. If that leads to prison, those are consequences of his choices, not mine. Rick looked away first. Closing arguments were brief. David Harrison had nothing to work with. His clients had confessed on the stand, the evidence was overwhelming, and any argument about family loyalty rang hollow after Linda's jealousy-fueled testimony. Catherine's closing was devastatingly simple. Margaret Thompson worked her entire life to build something she could pass on to someone she loved. She chose her granddaughter because Emma showed up. She excluded her son because he didn't. That was her right. That was her choice. And Richard and Linda Walker decided that choice didn't matter. She walked the jury through each piece of evidence one final time, then ended with Maggie's own words from her letter. "Don't let Robert and Linda steal what's rightfully yours. Fight for justice." Emma Walker is here today doing exactly what her grandmother asked her to do, fighting for justice, for truth, for the right of an elderly woman to have her final wishes honored. That's all she's ever wanted. That's all Margaret Thompson deserved. Judge Martinez took less than an hour to deliver his ruling. In 23 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such systematic and calculating elder abuse. He began, his voice hard. Richard and Linda Walker didn't just commit fraud. They exploited a vulnerable elderly woman's love for her son to steal her money, forge her will, and attempt to disinherit the one person who showed her genuine care and devotion. He went through each claim methodically. On the claim of fraud, the evidence is overwhelming. The will presented by the defendants is a forgery. The witnesses don't exist or never signed it. Digital evidence shows premeditation. I find in favor of the plaintiff. On the claim of theft, bank records clearly show unauthorized withdrawals totaling $47,000 used for luxury purchases, while Mrs. Thompson believed her son was in financial crisis. I find in favor of the plaintiff. On the claim of elder abuse, the defendants manipulated a dying, sedated woman into signing legal documents she couldn't comprehend. This is textbook exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I find in favor of the plaintiff. Remedies. The defendants are ordered to immediately transfer all property titles to Emma Walker. They will pay full restitution of $47,000 plus interest. They will pay punitive damages of $350,000. They will pay all attorney fees and court costs. Rick made a sound like he'd been punched. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, I am referring this case to the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The defendant's actions warrant charges of forgery, grand theft, elder abuse, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. In my opinion, prison time is not just warranted, it's necessary to protect other vulnerable elderly citizens from similar predation. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. The criminal trial was shorter than the civil one. With the evidence already compiled and my parents' confessions on record, the state attorney offered a plea deal: 18 months in prison for Rick, 14 for Linda, followed by 3 years probation each. Both would be permanently barred from serving as guardians or holding power of attorney for anyone. Their lawyer recommended they take it. The alternative was potentially 5 to 10 years if convicted at trial. I attended the sentencing hearing sitting in the back row. I'd told myself I was going for closure, but truthfully I wasn't sure why I was there. Rick and Linda sat at the defense table looking like strangers. Rick had lost at least 20 pounds. Linda's designer clothes were gone, replaced with a plain gray dress from Target. The judge asked if either defendant wanted to make a statement before sentencing. Rick stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. Your Honor, I want to say, I'm sorry. Not just because I'm facing prison, but because my mother deserved better. Emma deserved better. I spent years telling myself I was the victim, that my mother didn't appreciate me, that Emma got special treatment. The truth is, I was jealous of a 32-year-old woman who had the courage to show up and care for someone. I was too weak, too proud, too broken to be the son my mother needed. He turned to look at me, tears streaming down his face. Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, you did the right thing. What we did was unforgivable. And Mom would be proud of you for fighting for what was right, even when it cost you your family. Something in my chest cracked open. Not forgiveness I wasn't ready for, that might never be ready, but acknowledgement, truth, the first honest thing my father had said to me in years. Thank you, I whispered, not sure if he could hear me. The judge sentenced them both according to the plea agreement. They'd report to federal prison in 30 days. As they were let out, Linda looked back at me once. Her expression wasn't angry or resentful, just sad, tired, defeated. I drove back to Key West that evening, watching the sun set over the overseas highway, and let myself cry for the father I'd wanted and never had. The properties were legally mine by October. The first thing I did was hire an architect and a contractor to convert the largest house in Key West according to Maggie's dream. Maggie's house opened 6 months later, a fully accessible vacation rental for families with special needs children. Wheelchair ramps, sensory-friendly spaces, adaptive beach equipment, subsidized rates for families who couldn't otherwise afford a vacation. The Marathon condo became my retreat. I kept all of Maggie's furniture, her photos on the walls, her books on the shelves. When work got overwhelming or loneliness hit too hard, I'd drive down and spend the weekend surrounded by her memory. The Islamorada property I sold using the proceeds to establish the Margaret Thompson Nursing Scholarship, full tuition, for students from low-income families pursuing pediatric nursing. People told me I'd done the right thing. Sarah Mitchell said Maggie would be proud. My colleagues at the hospital called me brave. But on holidays, eating dinner alone in my apartment, I wondered if being right was worth being this lonely. I'd lost my family. Yes, they'd been broken and toxic and criminal, but they'd been mine. and now I had no one. 1 year after the trial, I visited Maggie's grave in the Key West Cemetery. It was a beautiful spot under a palm tree with a view of the ocean she'd loved. I sat on the grass and talked to her like I used to when she was alive. "I won, Graham. The houses are being used exactly like you wanted. The scholarship is funding 3 students this year. Everything you worked for is going to good causes." The wind rustled through the palm fronds. "But I'm so lonely sometimes. I see families at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I have nowhere to go." Was it worth it? Some days I'm not sure. I noticed something wedged into the vase at the base of her headstone. A small weatherproof envelope with my name on it in Maggie's handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened it. "My darling Emma, I'm writing this final letter knowing you'll find it someday when you need it most. Probably on a day when you're questioning whether fighting for justice was worth the loneliness it brought you. Let me tell you something I learned late in life. Doing the right thing often means walking a lonely road, but it's the only road worth walking. I would rather have had 1 person who truly loved me than 100 who only pretended. You loved me, Emma, truly, completely, without expecting anything in return. And that love meant more than all the properties I'm leaving you. If you're feeling alone right now, know this: somewhere I'm proud of you. Proud that you had the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it hurt. Proud that you honored my wishes even when others told you were wrong. You didn't destroy your family. It was already broken. You just refused to pretend it wasn't. Live your life fully, my brave girl. Use the resources I've given you to help others. Fall in love again. Make new family from the people who show up for you the way you showed up for me. And know that every time a child laughs on those beaches, every time a struggling nursing student gets their degree, every time someone experiences kindness because of what you've done, that's me living on through you. You were the best thing in my life, Emma. Don't ever doubt that. Forever your Graham." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet where I could carry it always. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of Maggie's house watching the first family arrive, a single mother from Orlando with her 10-year-old autistic son. The boy's face lit up when he saw the accessible beach equipment, the sensory room, the pool with a wheelchair lift. His mother started crying. "We've never been able to afford a real vacation," she said. "The hotels that can accommodate his needs cost thousands. This is a miracle." I watched them explore the house, the boy's delighted squeals carrying on the ocean breeze, and I felt Maggie's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside me. This, I thought. This is why it mattered. Not the money, not the properties, not even the justice, though that mattered too. It was about honoring a good woman's final wishes, about making sure her legacy helped people who needed it, about choosing what's right over what's comfortable. Yes, I was lonely sometimes. Yes, I'd lost my family. Yes, there were nights I cried myself to sleep, but I could look at myself in the mirror. I could visit Maggie's grave without shame. I could watch families like this one experience joy because of choices I'd made. That was the inheritance worth fighting for. My phone buzzed a text from Sarah Mitchell. "Saw the photo of your first family checking in. Maggie's smiling down on you, Mija. So proud." I smiled through my tears and typed back, "I hope so. I really hope so." The mother called to me from the beach. "Emma, come meet my son. He wants to thank you." I walked down to join them, feeling the warm sand beneath my feet, the salt air in my lungs, the sun on my face. And for the first time in a year, I felt something other than grief or loneliness. I felt peace.